Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. Kitabu Fadaail Sahaabah. We are on the chapter of the Fadaail of Bilal radiyallahu an. Abu Hurairah reports that the Prophet asked Bilal, Ya Bilal, حدثني بأرجى عمل عملته عندك في الإسلام منفعة فإني سمعت الليلة خشفا عليك بين يدي في الجنة. O Bilal, inform me of your most hopeful deed which you do in Islam, that you hope is most beneficial, because last night I heard your footsteps in front of me in Jannah. And Bilal responded, the deed I do which is more hopeful to me than any other is that whenever I make wudu, at any time during the day or night, then with that wudu I pray whatever Allah wills me to pray, or whatever He has written for me to pray. Notice that Bilal said at any time during the night and day. Well, this would include the prohibited times as well. So he would be praying the salah of the wudu during the prohibited times, because he says during any time of the night and day. One might argue back and say, well, this is general and the forbidden times are specific, and that would be a valid argument. However, the correct opinion on this matter is that if the salah has a valid reason, so it is done for a particular reason, then it is allowed to be prayed even during the prohibited times. Because the reason for the prohibited times is that you will imitate the kuffar who pray to the sun during the sunrise or the sunset, and you have to be different from them. However, if your salah has a particular reason for your praying it, such as the Tahiyyatul Masjid, then the danger of imitating the kuffar is far removed. We can take from the narration that Bilal is in Jannah. We ask the question here, is it legislated to pray the wudu prayer? That is to say, pray something because of the wudu?
The answer is that it is a sunnah not because of this narration, but because of the narration of Uthman radiallahu anh, when he described the wudu, saying that the Prophet says, whoever makes this wudu, like how I have made it, and then prays 2 rak'at after that, then his sins would be forgiven. Because you see, this is a verbal instruction from the Prophet, thus making it a sunnah. As for this narration of Bilal, then we do not take it as a sunnah from this narration. Rather, at best, what we can take is that this prayer is permissible because the Prophet acknowledged it from Bilal. So note the difference.
The next chapter about the Fadaail of Abdullah ibn Mas'ud and his mother radiyallahu anhuma. Abdullah ibn Mas'ud says that when the ayah was revealed, ليس على الذين آمنوا وعملوا الصالحات جناح فيما طعموا إذا ما اتقوا وآمنوا. There is no sin on those who believe and perform righteous actions about what they have eaten when they avoided the haram food now and they affirmed their iman. Up to the end of the ayah, the Prophet said to Abdullah ibn Mas'ud, أنت منهم, you are from these people. So from this narration we learn that if Abdullah ibn Mas'ud ate or drank anything haram, then this sin of his is forgiven, because he has iman and he has stopped that which was haram. And this narration would also confirm to us that Abdullah ibn Mas'ud has iman in his heart, because anyone can act like a Muslim outwardly, but do they have true, firm, solid, unwavering iman in their heart? This is too difficult to ascertain. Also in the chapter, Abu Musa reports that when I and my brother, he says, came from Al-Yaman, we used to consider Ibn Mas'ud and his mother amongst the members of the household of the Prophet, because of their frequency of visiting the Prophet and length of time they would stay in his house. We find from this narration that Abdullah ibn Mas'ud used to keep long company with the Prophet, and this is what the mu'min must do, keep company with the righteous. Another narration from Abu Ishaq, who said, I heard Abu Ahwas saying that I was with Abu Musa and Abu Mas'ud as Abdullah ibn Mas'ud died, and one of them said to the other, meaning one of Abu Musa or Abu Mas'ud, said to the other, do you find anyone of the likes of Ibn Mas'ud? And the other replied, do you say that no one can be his rival, meaning no one can be Ibn Mas'ud's rival? Ibn Mas'ud was admitted to the company of the Prophet when we were not, and he witnessed times with the Prophet when we were absent. So again, with this narration, Abu Musa and Abu Mas'ud radiyallahu anhuma are mentioning the fadila of Ibn Mas'ud in that he was with the company of the Prophet when others could not be. And hence, if that is the case, then it is likely that he is more knowledgeable than most people, and that there cannot be too many men to step toe to toe with Abdullah ibn Mas'ud in terms of the knowledge of the deen. So again, we say here what we said about the last hadith, keeping company with knowledgeable, righteous people. This is incumbent upon every mu'min. The next narration, Abdullah ibn Mas'ud told his companions to conceal their copies of the Mus'haf, saying, وَمَنْ يَغْلُلْ يَأْتِ بِمَا غَلَّ يَوْمَ الْقِيَامَةِ. Whoever makes ghulul will bring that item which he made a ghulul of on Yawm al-Qiyamah. So ghulul is to take from the war booty and hide it, keeping it to yourself, which is haram of course, but Ibn Mas'ud meant this in a good way, make a ghulul of your copies of the Mus'haf so that people do not burn them. He said to the other companions, عَلَى قِرَاءَةِ مَنْ تَأْمُرُونِي أَنْ أَقْرَأ. Whose recitation do you want me to recite? He says that I recited to the Prophet more than 70 surahs, and the companions of the Prophet know that I am more knowledgeable than them about the Book of Allah. And if I knew anyone more knowledgeable than me, I would travel to him. Definitely he's speaking highly of himself. But why? Because during the time of Uthman radiallahu anh, he wanted to unify the Masahif, because there were different versions and different types of recitations, and he wanted to unify them and burn the rest of them because it was causing fitna amongst the people. All the types of recitation were correct. So there were various styles of recitation, however, it was causing fitna, so you had to unify them and burn the rest, so it does not cause fitna and confusion. Ibn Mas'ud rejected this. He felt himself to have more authority than others telling him what to do. However, despite Ibn Mas'ud's authority and knowledge, he was not correct on this matter, because the decision of the Khalifa must be followed. Yes, it is true, he is one of the most knowledgeable about the Quran. Abdullah ibn Mas'ud, Ali ibn Abi Talib, and Abdullah ibn Abbas, these are the three foremost mufassirin from the Sahaba. Uthman ordered Zayd ibn Thabit to collect the Quran, the one of the Hijazi dialect, and the others were going to be burnt. Ibn Mas'ud said, how could Zayd ibn Thabit be doing this job when I am more worthy? From the narration in the Sunan, Ibn Mas'ud said that I recited more than 70 surahs whilst Zayd was playing with the kids. And again in the Sunan he says, how can I be left out from collecting the Mus'haf where I had embraced Islam, and yet the one who is collecting the Mus'haf was still in the loins of a kafir man? The bottom line in all of this is that the Sahaba, all of them, agreed to the Mus'haf of Uthman radiallahu anh, and in this group was also Abdullah ibn Mas'ud. Also in the chapter he says, by him besides whom there is no other deity worthy of worship, there is no chapter in the Book of Allah about which I do not know as to where it was revealed, and there is no ayah about which I do not know in which context it was revealed. And if I knew anyone more knowledgeable than me about the Book of Allah, and it was possible for the camel to reach that person, I would ride a camel to him.
The reason why Abdullah ibn Mas'ud was so annoyed is because when Uthman collected the Masahif, he only wanted to do it in the dialect of the Quraysh, whereas Ibn Mas'ud was from the Fadaail tribe, so his dialect was the Hudali dialect in the Quran. But of course Uthman wanted to reject all the other dialects, and this is what led to the friction.
So again, in this narration, Ibn Mas'ud is speaking highly of his own self. And the reason why he's doing it is, first of all, to recall the ni'mah of Allah Jalla wa Ala. وَأَمَّا بِنِعْمَةِ رَبِّكَ فَحَدِّثْ. And secondly, the reason why he's praising people is to encourage them to learn from him, because he knows what he's talking about. Because the alternative could be that they learn from someone who does not know. His intention is not that he should simply boast in front of other people. That is not a noble intention. And even the scholars have spoken highly of their own works in order to encourage people to take benefit from their works, because they're so sure that what they are talking about is the truth and is uncompromised. So if your intention is to recall the favor of Allah Jalla wa Ala upon you, as in, for example, Yusuf alayhi salam saying, ذَلِكُمَا مِمَّا عَلَّمَنِي رَبِّي, that is from what my Rabb has taught me, and your intention is to have other people learn from you, then you can speak highly of yourself. But if your intention is to look down upon others and to boast in front of others, and to be filled with self-conceit, then this is blameworthy. Sometimes you may give your credentials to defend yourself, and that is also allowed, if your honor is at stake. Also, we learn the importance of traveling out to seek knowledge, just as Ibn Mas'ud speaks about here, and just as in the Quran, Musa alayhi salam wants to travel out to meet Al-Khadir. Also in the chapter from Abdullah ibn Amr, he said that Ibn Mas'ud was one of the most beloved men to him because the Prophet said, خُذُوا الْقُرْآنَ مِنْ أَرْبَعَةٍ, take the Quran from 4 people. مِنْ ibn Abd, that is Abdullah ibn Mas'ud, وَمُعَاذ ibn Jabal, وَأُبَيْ ibn Ka'b, وَسَالِمْ مَوْلَى أَبِي حُذَيْفَةٍ. So he mentioned these 4 people: Ibn Abd, Mu'adh ibn Jabal, Ubay ibn Ka'b, and Salim, the servant of Abu Hudhayfa. The recitation spoken of here is the one which agrees with the Mus'haf of Uthman radiallahu anhu. As for the other Masahif, which Uthman burnt, then they are shadda, anomalous recitations. And this is how the ulama have considered them. The next chapter about the Fadila of Ubay ibn Ka'b radiallahu anhu. Anas says, 4 people collected the Quran during the time of the Prophet, all of them from the Ansar: Mu'adh ibn Jabal, Ubay ibn Ka'b, Zayd ibn Thabit, and a man from the Ansar called Abu Zayd. These are 4 people mentioned, but there were more. However, these are 4 of the eminent people who collected the Quran during the time of the Prophet. They gathered it all together.
And when we say collected the Quran, we mean memorized it. However, there were others who memorized it as well. So this number 4 is not given in the restrictive sense, that these were the only 4, but these were 4 famous memorizers of the Quran. So for example, we know that during the Khilafah of Abu Bakr, 70 memorizers of the Quran were killed at the Battle of Yamama. This is what led to Abu Bakr collecting the Quran, lest it should be forgotten with the death of the Huffaz. It can also be said that Anas is telling us the 4 whom he is sure of who memorized the Quran. So he's telling us what he knows. But of course, Anas does not know everything. There could be many others whom Anas is not aware of.
In this narration, there is a fadila of Ubay ibn Ka'b and his dedication to the Quran, as we found also in the previous narration, where the Prophet said, take the Quran from 4 people: Ibn Abd, Ubay ibn Ka'b, Mu'adh ibn Jabal, and Salim Mawla Abi Hudhayfa. In this narration, 4 people are mentioned. Ubay ibn Ka'b and Mu'adh ibn Jabal are mentioned in both of these narrations, but also Zayd ibn Thabit and Abu Zayd, 2 others are mentioned here. Also in the chapter, Anas ibn Malik reports that the Prophet said to Ubay ibn Ka'b, إِنَّ اللَّهَ أَمَرَنِي أَنْ أَقْرَأَ عَلَيْكَ لَمْ يَكُنِ الَّذِينَ كَفَرُوا. Allah orders me to recite Surah Al-Bayyinah to you. And Ubay asked, Sammani, did he name me, like individually? The Prophet said, Na'am, yes. To which Ubay ibn Ka'b started to cry. Clear virtue here, for Ubay ibn Ka'b, Allah Jalla wa Ala mentioned him by name. And this is a fadila enough. We saw how Allah Jalla wa Ala did this with Khadija, conveying the salam personally from him to her. Likewise with Jibreel doing the same. And also Jibreel conveying his salam individually, personally to Aisha. And we have another case in this narration. The next chapter about the Fadaail of Sa'ad ibn Mu'adh radiallahu anhu. Jabir ibn Abdullah reports, the Prophet said, whilst the janazah of Sa'ad ibn Mu'adh was in front of him, اهتز عرش الرحمن لموت سعد ibn Mu'adh. The throne of the Rahman shook at the death of Sa'ad ibn Mu'adh.
Okay, so the question is, why did the throne shake? And the answer is out of joy of receiving the great man Sa'ad ibn Mu'adh, which also tells us that the arsh, the throne, is some type of body that would actually shake.
Also Al-Bara reports that a garment of silk was presented to the Prophet. The companions touched it and admired its softness, to which the Prophet said, أَتَعْجَبُونَ مِنْ لِينِ هَذِهِ? Are you amazed at how soft this is? لَمَنَادِيلُ سَعَدِ بِن مُعَاذِ فِي الْجَنَّةِ خَيْرٌ مِنْهَا وَأَلْيَنُ. The handkerchiefs of Sa'ad ibn Mu'adh in Jannah are better than this and softer. We find from these 2 narrations immense fadila of Sa'ad ibn Mu'adh, who was the leader of the Aus tribe in Al-Madinah. He died during a wound sustained at the Battle of the Trench, and he died after giving his decision to execute the fighters of Bani Qurayza because of their treachery. and to take their women and children as servants. To which the Prophet said that your decision agrees with the decision of Allah above the 7 heavens. And that, of course, is another fadila. About the throne of Allah Jalla wa Ala shaking, we find here the status that Sa'ad ibn Mu'adh had with Allah Jalla wa Ala. For the throne of the Rahman to shake, it has to be at the death of someone with a lofty, lofty status, beyond our imagination. We can also testify that Sa'ad ibn Mu'adh will be in Jannah, so we can testify him by name. The next chapter about the Fadaail of Abu Dujana, Simak ibn Kharashah, radiyallahu anhu. Anas reports that on the day of Uhud, the Prophet ﷺ presented a sword, and he asked the people, "Man ya'khudhu minni hadha?" Who will take the sword from me? And everyone stretched forth their hands wanting to take it. Ana, they said, me, I will take it. But then the Prophet asked, فَمَنْ يَأْخُذُهُ بِحَقِّهِ? But who will take it in order to fulfill its rights? And then the people withdrew their hands because they felt in doubt. They may not be able to give the sword its due rights in terms of fighting. But a man called Simak ibn Kharashah, who goes by the kunya of Abu Dujana, said, أَنَا آخُذُهُ بِحَقِّهِ, I will take it and fulfill its due rights. Anas says that he took it and struck the heads of the mushrikeen with it. Everyone is a mighty brave person when you do not have a challenge in front of you. But when you have a fierce challenge in front of you and you know you have to fulfill the rights, then it becomes a different story altogether. And then doubts creep into your mind, and you begin to doubt your own self and your integrity. But here we find Abu Dujana did not falter, did not waver. He stood like a mountain even in the face of a challenge, with a heavy responsibility on his shoulders to take this sword and to give it its due right.
As for its due right, then what exactly is it? And the answer is that you keep fighting with this sword until either Allah Jalla wa Ala grants you victory over the enemies or you die. But you will not carry this sword and flee away from the enemy like a coward. That you are not allowed to do. But Muslims like Abu Dujana are few and far between nowadays, where people are just infatuated with this dunya.
Next chapter about the Fadaail of Abdullah ibn Amr ibn Haram, the father of Jabir radiyallahu anhuma. Abdullah ibn Jabir reports that the dead body of my father was brought, and it was covered. I tried to lift the cover, but the people prevented me. Then I did it again, and the people prevented me. But then the Prophet came and lifted it, or ordered it to be lifted, and he heard the noise of a woman mourner. He asked, "Who is it?" And they said, "It is the daughter of Amr," or they said, "It is the sister of Amr." And the Prophet said, وَلِمَا تَبْكِي فَمَا زَالَتِ الْمَلَائِكَةُ تُظِلُّهُ بِأَجْنِحَتِهَا حَتَّى رُفِعَ. Why is she crying? The angels are providing shade for him with their wings until he is raised. This is a monumental fadila of Abdullah ibn Amr. He fell at the Battle of Uhud, and clearly this is an honoring for anyone who falls at the Battle of Uhud.
You see in sports events, when a player with an illustrious career is playing his final match, the whole stadium rises to their feet and gives him a round of applause because of his contribution to the sport. And the opposition players form a guard of honor either side of him, again giving him a round of applause as he enters the playing arena. Certainly this would be an immense honor that the player would feel. But if this is the case with just a few tens of thousands of people, then how about the case for the shaheed, for whom the inhabitants of the heavens, the malaika, applaud and shade as he is risen up to Jannah? The honor that one must feel then is simply indescribable and of inestimable worth. And we have already discussed the hadith about the shaheed wanting to return back to the dunya and be killed again in the way of Allah because of what he sees of the honor bestowed upon him. It's also narrated that Jabir ibn Abdullah was worried that his father left behind many daughters and also a debt. And the Prophet told him, "Shall I not give you some glad tidings about what happened when Allah met your father?" Allah asked him, "Wish for whatever you want." And Abdullah ibn Haram wished to return back to be killed again in his way. To which Allah Jalla wa Ala revealed the ayah, "Do not consider those who die fighting in the way of Allah as dead, but rather they are alive with their Rabb." being provided for. The Prophet said that Allah does not speak to anyone except from behind a hijab. But the Prophet says, however, to Abdullah ibn Haram, he spoke face to face. This really is quite the extraordinary merit. We also have reported that after 6 months, Jabir dug up the grave of his father, Abdullah ibn Haram, and he saw no change in the body except for a few strands of hair. So we see yet another amazing merit and honor.
The next chapter about the Fadaail of Julaybib radiyallahu anh. Abu Barza reports, after a battle they were involved in, the Prophet gave the spoils of war, and he asked the people, are you missing anyone? They said, yes, we're missing Fulan, Fulan, and they named them. And then he asked again, are you missing anyone? They said, yes, we were missing Fulan, Fulan, and they named them. He asked again, are you missing anyone? And then they said, no, because they felt they had mentioned everyone who was missing. But the Prophet said, وَلَكِنِّي أَفْقِدُ جُلَيْبِيبًا فَاطْلُبُوا. But I am missing Julaybib, so seek him, that is, look for him. So they went out and looked for him amongst those who had fallen, and they found him felled with 7 other people around him. The Prophet came over and stood, and he said, قَتَلَ سَبْعَةً ثُمَّ قَتَلُوهُ هَذَا مِنِّي وَأَنَا مِنْ هَذَا مِنِّي وَأَنَا مِنْ. He killed 7 and then they killed him. This man, meaning Julaybib, is from me and I am from him. He is from me and I am from him. Then the Prophet placed him on his arms, and a grave was dug for him, and he was buried, and he was not washed. Look how careful the Prophet is to remember those who are forgotten by others. And this is the sign of a leader, that he takes care and is considerate of everyone under his rule. Sulaiman alayhi salam missed the hudhud when he was inspecting his army. A hudhud is a small bird. It's easy to miss, but a true leader knows every one of his members who are following him. In any case, this is a great fadilah for Julaybib radiyallahu anh, forgotten by everyone but not by the Prophet. He died a shaheed, that's why he was not washed. And he is from the Prophet and the Prophet is from him. Every Muslim would want the Prophet to utter these words for him. Next, we take a look at the Fadaail of Abu Dharr radiyallahu anh. This is a lengthy narration, let us paraphrase it. Abu Dharr says that I, my brother Unais, and our mother stayed with our maternal uncle, who treated us well. However, the men of his tribe felt jealous, and they said, when you are away from your house, Unais, your brother, commits adultery with your wife. And he says, our maternal uncle came and accused us of this sin, which the people were talking about out of their jealousy. And I said to him, all the good you have done, you have neutralized it with this accusation. We cannot stay with you any longer. So they packed their luggage and set off. They camped by the side of Mecca. Abu Dharr says to his nephew that I used to observe the Salah 3 years before meeting the Prophet. Nephew asked him, who did you pray to? He said, I prayed to Allah. He asked, which direction did you face in your Salah? And Abu Dharr replied, wherever Allah willed me to face. I used to observe the night prayer and fall down in prostration until the sunrise. So anyway, Unais said to Abu Dharr that I have work in Mecca, so you stay here. When he came back, Unais, the brother of Abu Dharr, reported that I met a man in Mecca who is upon your religion, that is to say, worshipping Allah alone, not worshipping the idols. And he claims that Allah has sent him. Abu Dharr asked, what do the people say about him? Unais said, they say he is a diviner, or a poet, or a magician. So that is sha'ir, which is poet, kahin, a diviner, or a sahir, a magician. And Unais himself was a poet. He said, I have heard the words of a diviner, and his words are not similar to the diviner. And I know poetry, and his verses which he recites are not poetry. By Allah, he is truthful and they are liars. Abu Dharr wanted to go and see this man himself. He asked for the Prophet. They used to call him Sabi, as in the Sabi'un. The people felt that Abu Dharr is also a Muslim, so they attacked him. Abu Dharr said that he fell down unconscious, and then he regained consciousness and went to the Zamzam water to wash off the blood. He says, I stayed there for 30 nights and days, and I had no food except the Zamzam, and they repaired wrinkles on my stomach, but I did not feel any hunger. He says that the people would sleep in the moonlight in Mecca, and there were 2 women circumambulating the Kaaba, invoking the name of Isaf and Na'ilah. These were names of two idols. And I said to them, أنكح أحدهما الأخرى, marry one idol to the other. He was mocking the idols. But these women did not stop praying to the idols. Then I said, their private parts are like wood. And he was so blunt in this way. The women went away crying, saying, had we someone from our people, they would have beat you up and taught you a lesson for these obscene words. These women met the Prophet and Abu Bakr, who had been coming down the hill. The Prophet came and kissed the black stone and made tawaf, as well as Abu Bakr, his companion. And then he made salah. Abu Dhar said, I was the first to greet him with the salam. And the Prophet replied back. The Prophet asked him where he's from. He said, from the tribe of Ghifar. He asked him, how long have you been here? He said, for the last 30 nights. He said, who has been feeding you? He said, no food except Zamzam. And I have grown bulky, and there are wrinkles on my stomach, and I do not feel any hunger. The Prophet said that the Zamzam is blessed, and it also serves as food. Abu Bakr offered to entertain Abu Dhar as a guest, and the raisins of Ta'if were brought, and this was the first food Abu Dhar ate. Then the Prophet said to Abu Dhar, I have been shown a land abounding in trees, and I feel it can only be Yathrib. You are a preacher, O Abu Dhar, on my behalf, and I hope Allah will benefit your people. Abu Dhar went back to his brother Unais and informed him that he has embraced the deen of the Prophet. Unais also embraced, and their mother also embraced. They returned back to the tribe of Ghifar to preach the message, and half of the tribe embraced Islam. And when the Prophet came to Al-Madinah, the remaining half of Ghifar also embraced Islam. And then the tribe of Aslam came and also embraced Islam. And the Prophet said in response to this, Ghifar ghafar Allahu laha wa Aslam salamaha Allah. As for the tribe of Ghifar, Allah has given them maghfirah. And as for the tribe of Aslam, then Allah has saved them, or given them salama. We find from this narration that Abu Dhar al-Ghifari was upon his fitrah even before Islam. He would pray to Allah Jalla wa Ala, however he could. So we find that even in an environment of shirk, he remained steadfast upon the fitrah which he was born. Such people are rare, because most people are just fashioned by their environment. Note also that it is not permissible to insult the idols or gods of other religion. Indeed, it is not permissible to insult any other religion. As Allah Jalla wa Ala orders us, وَلَا تَسُبُّوا الَّذِينَ يَدْعُونَ مِن دُونِ اللَّهِ فَيَسُبُّوا اللَّهَ عَدْوًا بِغَيْرِ عِلْمٍ, because they will insult Allah Jalla wa Ala. But Abu Dhar al-Ghifari did not know the ruling, so he can be excused. The next chapter about the Fadaail of Jarir ibn Abdullah radiyallahu anhu. Jarir himself reports that since I embraced Islam, the Prophet never refused my permission to see him, and he only ever looked at me with a smile. Also he reports, in the Jahiliyyah times in Yemen, there was a temple called Dhul Khalasa. It was like the Yemeni Kaaba. The Prophet sent me to destroy this temple. So I went forth with 150 horsemen of the tribe of Ahmas, and we destroyed it and killed anyone we found there. We came back, and the Prophet made dua for us and for the tribe of Ahmas. And in another narration, the Prophet struck his chest with his hand and said, Allahumma thabbithu waj'alhu hadiyan mahdiyya. O Allah, grant him steadfastness and make him into one who is guided and the one who guides others. So we take note of this beautiful dua that the Prophet made for Jarir, to give him steadfastness and to make him one who guides others and is himself guided. That's the perfect combination. You benefit yourself by being guided, and you benefit others by guiding them. You cannot ask for more than that. We take note of the praiseworthy action of Jarir and his horsemen in destroying the temple, which goes by the name of Dhul Khalasa. We also find the love that the Prophet had in that he always allowed Jarir to see him and always met Jarir with a smile. Next we move to the Fadaail of Abdullah ibn Abbas. Ibn Abbas himself reports that the Prophet went to the lavatory, and I placed for him water for the wudu. When the Prophet came out, he asked who placed this water here, and he was told it was Ibn Abbas, to which the Prophet replied, Allahumma faqih, O Allah, grant him fiqh or understanding. Why would the Prophet make dua of fiqh in this instance? Because Ibn Abbas showed or displayed fiqh, understanding that if the Prophet has gone to the lavatory, he's going to need water to make wudu, and this is why he presented water. So he shows a great understanding, and so this is why the Prophet made dua of fiqh for him. The next chapter about the Fadaail of Abdullah ibn Umar. Ibn Umar himself reports, he says he had a dream in which he had a thick silk cloth, and wherever in Jannah he wanted to go, that silk cloth would reach that place. He reported this dream to Hafsa, who told the Prophet, to which the Prophet replied, Ara Abdullah rajulan saliha. I see Abdullah as a righteous man. Also, Ibn Umar reports, he says when a person would have a dream, he would report it to the Prophet. He says, I wished that I could also have a dream to report to the Prophet. He says, at that time I was an unmarried youth. I was sleeping in the masjid, and I saw in a dream 2 angels take hold of me, and they carried me to the fire. It had 2 pillars like those of a well. I saw in the fire some people whom I recognized, and I began to say, A'udhu billahi minan nar. A'udhu billahi minan nar. I seek refuge in Allah from the fire. He said this repeatedly. Then another angel joined these other 2 and said to me, Lam tura, do not fear. Ibn Umar says, I reported this dream to Hafsa, who reported it to the Prophet, and the Prophet said, Ni'ma rajulu Abdullah, law kana yusalli min al-layl. What an excellent man Abdullah is, if only he would pray the nighttime prayer. And one of the narrators, Salim, says that after that, Abdullah would sleep very little, as he would be up in prayer. So in this chapter about the Fadaail of Ibn Umar, we have 2 dreams, both of them very positive dreams. Even the one where he's taken to the fire of Jahannam, he's not thrown into it, he's just taken near it, and he was told not to fear. So all in all, it is a positive dream. So 2 dreams, 2 virtues. And in both of these dreams, the Prophet comments by giving tazkiyah to Abdullah ibn Umar. We can further take that standing up at night time in the tahajjud prevents you from the fire. It is a sabab or a cause to be saved from the fire. We can take that Allah Jalla wa Ala can inform you of any of your shortcomings through a dream, just like with Abdullah ibn Umar and the nighttime prayer. We can also take that you're allowed to narrate your dreams to someone whom you trust and can give you the interpretation. We can also take that you can ask someone else to seek a fatwa on your behalf, just like Ibn Umar did here with his sister Hafsa. We also take how eager Ibn Umar was to do righteous actions, as he acted immediately on the advice of the Prophet for the nighttime prayer. The next chapter about the Fadaail of Anas ibn Malik. Sulaym, the mother of Anas ibn Malik, came to the Prophet and she says, this is your servant, so make dua for him. And the Prophet said, Allahumma akthir malahu wa waladah wa barik lahu fima a'taytah. O Allah, give him many children and much wealth, and bless him in what you give him. We find that Allah answered this dua, for he did have many children and much wealth. Some may use this narration and say that it is good then to strive for much wealth and to become rich. Well, having much wealth in and of itself is no good. Notice how the Prophet invoked blessing, and this is what makes a difference. If you have much wealth and it is blessed, then this is fine and good. But if you have much wealth and it is not blessed, and you're using it for the wrong causes, let's say, then there is no good in that. Also in the chapter, Anas reports, I was playing with my friends, and the Prophet came, greeted me, and sent me on an errand, and this delayed me from returning to my mother. When I did so, she asked me, what kept you back? And I said, the Prophet sent me on an errand. She said, what errand? And he told her, it is a secret. Sulaym said, do not reveal your secret to anyone. Anas, reporting this narration, says to his student Thabit, that if I were to reveal or divulge this secret to anyone, it would have been to you, O Thabit. Previously we found that the Prophet gave a secret to Abdullah ibn Ja'far, and he did not reveal it to anyone, and here, to Anas ibn Malik, another secret, and Anas is not revealing it to anyone. He did not even reveal it to his mother. The next chapter about the Fadaail of Abdullah ibn Salam radiallahu anh. Sa'd ibn Abi Waqqas reports, saying, I never heard the Prophet testify Jannah to any living person except Abdullah ibn Salam. Also in the chapter, from Qais ibn Ubadah, he says, I was in the company of some people, and a man walked in who had on his face the effects of tranquility and calmness. Some people started to say he is from the dwellers of Jannah. He observed 2 rak'at and went out. Qais says, I followed him. He got into his house and I got in also, and began to talk to him. He said that some people are saying that you are from the inhabitants of Jannah. This man said, Subhanallah, it is not right for a man to speak about that which he does not know. But I shall tell you why they were making this claim. During the time of the Prophet, I saw in a dream that I was in a garden, a vast garden. There stood an iron pillar with its base on the earth and its summit right on the sky, and there was a handhold. It was said to me, "Climb up this pillar," and I said, "I am unable to do so." And thereupon a helper came to me and supported me. So I climbed up this pillar until I was at the top and grasped the handhold. It was said to me, "Hold tightly onto it." And at that point I woke up, and the handhold was in my hand. I narrated the dream to the Prophet, whereupon he said, "The garden is Islam, and the pillar is the pillar of Islam, and the handle is the firm handle of Iman, and you are upon Islam until you die." The narrator says that man was Abdullah ibn Salam. So in this narration we find yet another dream, and in the Fadaail of Abdullah ibn Umar we found two dreams which he had, and both were his Fadaail, and this is the Fadila in a dream form of Abdullah ibn Salam, that he will be rightly guided up until his death, and what is necessitated from this is that he will have to be in Jannah. We can also take that righteous people are such that their righteousness can be known through their face. Notice how he says there came a man who had the effects of khushu' on his face, this tranquility which comes about from the fear of Allah Jalla wa'ala. Just like we say that you must have khushu' in your salah. It's this air of tranquility and calmness, and when you look at such a person, you yourself begin to feel calm and tranquil. That type of look. The next chapter about the Fadaail of Hassan ibn Thabit radiyallahu anhu. Abu Hurairah reports that Umar ibn al-Khattab, when he was the Khalifa, passed by Hassan ibn Thabit, who was reciting some poetry in the masjid. Umar looked at him with discontent, whereupon Hassan said, "I used to recite poetry in the masjid when the one who is better than you," referring to the Prophet, "was present." Then Hassan looked to Abu Hurairah and said to him, "I beseech you by Allah to tell if you had not heard the Prophet saying, Ajib anni Allahumma ayyidhu bi ruhil qudus, answer on my behalf, O Allah, aid him with Jibreel." And Abu Hurairah said yes. We find from this narration that it is permissible to recite poetry in the masjid, as long as it is praiseworthy and beneficial poetry, not speaking about evil matters. And also as long as you do not attach yourself too much to poetry, that it takes away too much of your time. Remember the hadith, لَأَن يَمْلَأَ جَوْفُ الرَّجُلِ قَيْحًا خَيْرٌ لَهُ مِنْ أَن يَمْلَأَ شِعْرًا. That the belly of one of you to be filled with pus is better than to be filled with poetry. But this is if you're too infatuated with poetry that it takes you away from the Quran. So this is the matter with the nasheed. We also learn that Hassan ibn Thabit used to defend the honor of the Prophet using poetry. That was the media in those days, because the kuffar would use poetry to attack the Prophet, to ridicule him and to satirize him. And Hassan ibn Thabit would defend the Prophet. That's why the Prophet said, "Ajib anni, answer back on my behalf. Allahumma ayyidhu bi ruhil qudus." Oh Allah, help him or aid him with the purified soul, that is Jibreel. It also proves that the Prophet was not a poet, because he was unable to defend himself using poetry. He needed Hassan ibn Thabit, an expert poet, to defend him. And this would be an answer back to those who say that the Prophet himself was a poet and he is the one who recited the Quran. No, he was not a poet. This narration strongly indicates that. As for the Quran, Allah Jalla wa Ala says, وَمَا عَلَّمْنَاهُ الشِّعْرَ وَمَا يَنبَغِي لَهُ. We did not teach him poetry, and it was not fitting for us to teach him poetry. Also, Unais, the brother of Abu Dharr, as we took the narration, he was himself a poet, and when he heard the Quran, he said, "I have heard the diviners, and this speech is not like the diviners. And I know poetry, and this speech does not resemble poetry." So the speech of the Quran does not resemble anything which man has come out with or developed in terms of language. Also from Al-Bara ibn Azib, that the Prophet said to Hassan, "Uhjuhum aw hajihim wa Jibreel ma'ak." Make fun of them or satirize them, meaning the kuffar, Jibreel is with you. And this is because, like we said before, the kuffar would satirize the Prophet, and so you're allowed to mock them back, if they mock you. But of course, you're not allowed to mock their deen. If you are going to start the mockery, you're not allowed to start the mockery. But if they mock you, then you have the right to mock them back. But you do not have the right to start the mockery off. Also notice how he uses strong words to defend his own self against Umar. And there's no problem with that, even if Umar is the ruler. You defend yourself with strength and resoluteness. Also in the chapter, Masruq, a tabi'i, says, I visited Aisha when Hassan was sitting there reciting some poetry. Masruq asked her, why do you let him sit with you when Allah Jalla wa Ala says, وَالَّذِي تَوَلَّى كِبْرَهُ مِنْهُمْ لَهُ عَذَابٌ عَظِيمٌ. And as for the one who was guilty of most of the slander, he will have a painful torment. And Aisha says, what torment is more severe than going blind? He, meaning Hassan, used to defend the Prophet and satirize the kuffar on behalf of the Prophet. So what's the background for this narration? When Aisha was slandered, as some people accused her of zina, unfortunately some Muslims also got caught up in this web of slander. The noble companion Hassan ibn Thabit was one of them, and he was punished. But the Prophet did not punish the munafiqeen. They will get theirs in the akhirah. This is why Masruq asked her, why are you letting him sit with you like this when he slandered you? But Hassan ibn Thabit, as she says correctly, used to defend the Prophet with his poetry and would mock the kuffar in return. So there is no blame against Hassan ibn Thabit. He fell into a mistake, he was punished for it, and we forget it and move on. What we do not forget are his virtues. Let's move on to the Fadaail of Abu Hurairah ad-Dawsi radiyallahu anhu. Abu Hurairah himself reports, he says, I invited my mother to Islam. She was a mushrikah. She said something about the Prophet which I hated. I came to the Prophet weeping. He said, I invited my mother to Islam and she did not accept, and she said something to me which I did not like. So supplicate for her. And the Prophet supplicated for her to put his mother on the right path. He says, I came out pleased that the Prophet made dua. I went back home and the door was closed. My mother told me, Abu Hurairah, just wait. I heard the noise of water falling, as if she was taking a bath. She put on her shirt and covered her head with a headdress, that is the khimar. She opened the door and testified to the shahada. Abu Hurairah said, I went back to the Prophet, this time shedding tears of joy. I said, O Prophet, rejoice, for Allah has answered your dua. The Prophet praised Allah and uttered some good words. Then Abu Hurairah said, O Prophet, make dua to Allah that Allah may instill love in the hearts of the mu'min for me and my mother, and let our hearts filled with their love. And the Prophet made the dua that may the mu'minun love Abu Hurairah and his mother, and may they love the mu'mineen. Abu Hurairah said, there is not a mu'min who is created who hears about me, nor one who sees me, except that he loves me. This is truly a heartfelt narration. One always feels love to someone who does you a favor. Well then, how about Abu Hurairah, who has reported more hadith than any other Sahabi? Every single mu'min who comes after Abu Hurairah is indebted to him. So how can the mu'min not have any love towards Abu Hurairah and his mother as well? We also take from this narration that the mu'minun women used to wear the khimar. Notice how Abu Hurairah said that his mother came out wearing the khimar. That's the word used, which is the head covering. So the khimar is not specific to the wives of the Prophet. Notice this, as some people of deviancy may try to make this ruling specific to the wives of the Prophet. It is not specific to them. All the scholars agree to this matter. Also in the chapter, Ibn Shihab reports that Abu Hurairah made a comment saying, look, the people are saying no one reports a hadith as much as Abu Hurairah, and how is it that the Muhajirun and the Ansar do not narrate the ahadith like Abu Hurairah narrates it? And Abu Hurairah gave the reply to this. He said, this is because my brothers from the Ansar were busy with their trees and their gardens, and my brothers from the Muhajirun were busy with their trade. They were businessmen. But I kept away from both occupations and used to live on the bare minimum. I was present in the company of the Prophet when the rest were absent. I retained much in my mind where they forgot. The Prophet said, he amongst you who spreads out his clothing and listens to me, and then presses his clothing against his chest, would not forget anything he heard from me. He says, so I spread my mantle, and when the Prophet stopped, I pressed it against my chest, and after that I never forgot anything I heard from the Prophet. And had it not been 2 ayat which Allah revealed, I would not have narrated any hadith. And the ayah, إِنَّ الَّذِينَ يَكْتُمُونَ مَا أَنزَلْنَا مِنَ الْبَيِّنَاتِ وَالْهُدَى. This is ayah 159 of Surah Al-Baqarah up till the end of this ayah and the one after it. This narration illustrates to us that working diverts you from knowledge. This is generally the case for most people. Hence, seeking knowledge should be done before you start working on a regular basis. Yes, seeking knowledge is for life, but we're talking about the bulk of knowledge that you want to seek. It needs to be done before your mind is distracted with careers and occupation and family life and all of this. We find the incredible power of this ayah about people who conceal what they know, and they do not make it open and plain to the people. They are cursed, and the one who curses them will curse them. You are not allowed to conceal any knowledge of the deen, except if it is for a greater good, as was the case, for example, with the Prophet and Mu'adh ibn Jabal talking about the rights of Allah on the servants and the servants' rights on Allah. It is worth knowing that Abu Hurairah was not the most knowledgeable Sahabi. There were other Sahaba who were more knowledgeable than him. Rather, Abu Hurairah was the one who was most prolific in narrating a hadith, and that's a different matter. We also find this peculiar type of miracle in that the one who spreads his clothing when he listens to the Prophet and then he withdraws his clothing and presses it against his chest will not forget what the Prophet has said. Well, this does not apply to us now because the Prophet is dead, but it did apply then. The next chapter about the Fadaail of the people of Badr and the story of Hatib ibn Abi Balta'ah. Ubaidullah ibn Rafi', one of the scribes of Ali ibn Abi Talib, says that he heard Ali say that the Prophet sent me, Ali says, and Az-Zubayr and Al-Miqdad. He said, go to the gardens of Khakh. This is between Mecca and Medina, 12 miles from Al-Medina. And there you will find a woman riding a camel. She possesses something which you must obtain from her. He says we rushed on our horses. And indeed we did meet a woman. We asked her to deliver this letter to us. And she said, there is no letter with me. They said, either you give us the letter or we will take your clothes off. And she brought out that letter, hidden in the plaits of her hair. We brought this letter. It was written by Hatib ibn Abi Balta'ah, who was warning the people of Mecca about the plans of the Prophet to attack them. The Prophet said, Hatib, what is this? He said, O Messenger, do not be hasty in judging me. I am a man attached to the Quraysh. Those who are with you amongst the Muhajirin have blood relations with the Quraysh, and thus they can protect their families. But I had no one over there to protect my family, and wanted some supporters from them to protect my family. And I have not done this out of apostasy, that is to say kufr after Islam. Thereupon the Prophet said, Sadaq, he has spoken the truth. But Umar said, let me strike the neck of this hypocrite. The Prophet answered, إِنَّهُ قَدْ شَهِدَ بَدْرًا. He witnessed the battle of Badr. وَمَا يُدْرِيكَ لَعَلَّ اللَّهَ اطَّلَعَ عَلَى أَهْلِ بَدْرٍ فَقَالَ اعْمَلُوا مَا شِئْتُمْ فَقَدْ غَفَرْتُ لَكُمْ. And how would you know? Perhaps Allah has looked to the people of Badr and said, do as you wish, for I have forgiven you. And on this occasion Allah Jalla wa Ala sent down the ayah, يَا أَيُّهَا الَّذِينَ آمَنُوا لَا تَتَّخِذُوا عَدُوِّي وَعَدُوَّكُمْ أَوْلِيَاءَ. O Mu'minun, do not take my enemies and your enemies as allies. We take from this that the Prophet received a direct message from Allah Jalla wa Ala that there is a woman carrying this letter. So he sent Az-Zubayr ibn al-Awwam, his cousin, and Ali ibn Abi Talib and Al-Miqdad to intercept this message. All three of these were skilled horse riders. Look at the determination of Ali ibn Abi Talib in front of this woman who says that she has no letter. Ali knows that he is upon the truth. So look how determined he is to take that letter from her. And this is how a mu'min needs to be when he argues with people of batil or those who are arguing for batil, is to have azima, firm, strong will. As they say, the sword is only as good as the one who strikes. If you have a very sharp sword but you are a coward, then this sword is no good, even if it is the best sword in the world. Whereas you may have a pretty feeble sword, but if you are brave and strong, then this pretty feeble sword will be able to vanquish many enemies. But if your enemies or your interlocutor sees that you are hesitant and you are not sure of yourself, then you have lost the argument. And what about the ruling of a traitor? Somebody who is spying on the Muslims for the kuffar. Can he be executed? The answer is yes, he can be executed. And we can even argue he ought to be executed. Hatib was not. And the reason was because of his duty to the Muslimin at Badr. Some scholars said that the one who betrays the Muslims in this way, by divulging their secrets to the enemies, he becomes a murtad, as he has taken the kuffar as his awliya, and hence he is from them. وَمَنْ يَتَوَلَّهُمْ مِنْكُمْ فَإِنَّهُ مِنْهُمْ. However, the correct opinion is he does not become a murtad, but he is sinful and worthy of execution. Some other scholars said that he's not worthy of execution because the blood of a Muslim is not halal except for 3 reasons, as the Prophet mentioned: the adulterer, a life for a life, and the murtad, the one who leaves the jama'ah. And the one divulging the secrets is not any one of these 3, therefore he should not be killed. Others who say that he should be killed, they say that the only reason why Hatib was spared is because he witnessed Badr, not because he was merely a Muslim. So in his particular case, there was a preventative factor, which prevented him from being executed. So we say that such a person is worthy of execution, but he would be executed as a Muslim, and hence he would die as a Muslim, and treated as such. Unless the Khalifa thinks that he should not be executed because there is a greater good in that, in which case it is the Khalifa's decision. We find the fadila of Umar here in that even though he was enraged, he still sought permission from the Prophet to execute Hatib, and this is because of his adab and his etiquettes before the Prophet. We find in this narration the fadila of all of the people of Badr. But when he says, "I'malu ma shi'tum," do as you wish, does that mean that you can commit any type of sin as you want? As long as you witness Badr, then this is okay? The answer is of course no, because he did not say, "Adhnibu ma shi'tum," commit as much sins as you want. No, rather he says, do as you want. That is, work your righteousness, and if you do happen to commit sins, then the fighting of Badr will expiate those sins. Also, in this there is a good news for the people of Badr, that they will not become kuffar, because if you become kuffar, then all your righteous actions are nullified. That includes fighting at Badr. And this is because the people of Badr are forgiven, but kufr is not forgiven. That is to say, if you die upon kufr. In a version of Al-Bukhari, when the Prophet said this, Umar began to cry and said, "Allahu wa rasuluhu a'lam." Allah and the Messenger know better. So look how first he was so severe, and then his severity turns to softness. So he was severe upon the truth, yet soft to the truth. The people of Badr did not hear Allah Jalla wa Ala say, "Do as you wish, for I have forgiven you." But that does not matter, because the rule still counts, even if they did not hear it. Much like if a man divorces his wife and she did not hear it, the divorce still counts. We also find that the emotions of a man can drive him to do that which is a major sin, so one must be aware. We ask a question, is it permissible to take somebody's clothes off to obtain what you need if the well-being of the Muslims is at stake? And the answer is yes.
Because there is a greater good in that. Let's just take a few more benefits. We can take from the narration of Ibn Umar that you are allowed to spend the night in the masjid and sleep there, just like how he used to. Also, from the dua that the Prophet made for Anas to increase his wealth, we may take that it is better to be rich than poor. But that's on the condition that your wealth is blessed and it does not distract you from your obligatory duties, and that you are spending your wealth in ways that will not displease Allah Jalla wa Ala. Also, in the narration of Hatib, when the Prophet said, لَعَلَّ اللَّهَ اطَّلَعَ عَلَى أَهْلِ بَدْرٍ, the word لَعَلَّ is often translated to perhaps, meaning that you're hoping for something. But the ulama say that here, when it comes to the kalam of Allah Jalla wa Ala or the Messenger, then لَعَلَّ is for tahqiq, meaning it has definitely happened. It is also worth pointing out that Mistah ibn Uthatha was from those who was guilty of slander against Aisha, yet he received the had punishment, and the Prophet did not forgive him, despite the fact that he was also a Badri. So why was he not forgiven? And the answer is that even if you're a Badri, you're not forgiven for those sins for which there is a had punishment, such as al-qadhaf, because the rules must be applied. We may also take that you look at a person as a whole, and not just individual sins, just like the Prophet took a look at Hatib as a whole, and it became known that this man is sincere because he was a Badri. And in the same way Aisha defended Hassan, despite the fact that Hassan was guilty of slandering her, she said, but he used to defend the Prophet using his poetry. So you look at a person as a whole. And this is how we would defend the Sahaba from the Rafida, who pick out faults of the Sahaba and highlight them as if that's the only thing that they have done. But we look at the Sahaba as a whole. So even if they did have mistakes, when you look at the whole picture, we find their good far outweighs their bad. And it is only people of jealousy and envy and hatred who simply pick out the faults. and refused to look at the larger picture, because if they did, it would completely fly in the face of their ulterior motives. Let's take some review questions. So question number 1. What notable action did Jarir ibn Abdullah perform? Question number 2. Recall the 2 dreams that Abdullah ibn Umar had, which count to his merits. Question number 3. Recall the dream that Abdullah ibn Salam had, which the Prophet interpreted, which counts towards his merits.